My family decided who I was long before I ever had the chance to explain myself. From the moment I could remember, my life was measured against my brother's achievements. He was bright, charming, and ambitious, a child who could do no wrong in their eyes. Awards, grades, compliments, opportunities, they came to him like sunlight warming a field. And then there was me. Quiet. Observant. A girl whose ambitions and dreams seemed too small, too different, too unconventional. By the time I was 16, the word failure had settled into our home like dust in the corners, inescapable, unwelcome, and persistent. It was never spoken as an insult outright, but rather woven into casual comments, sighs, and stories told to relatives. "She's still figuring things out," my mother would say. "She's sensitive," my father added with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. My brother's successes were celebrated publicly, my struggles were whispered privately, or better yet, never mentioned at all, as if ignoring me made me smaller. I learned quickly how to survive in that environment. I learned to make myself invisible, to sit quietly, and to smile politely while my family dissected my life like it was a science experiment. At dinner parties, I would nibble at my food and watch the conversation pass me by. If I said something, it was twisted into proof that I was inadequate. If I stayed silent, I was deemed unambitious or lacking in spirit. There was no winning. Silence became my only defense. And yet, in those quiet moments, I built myself in ways they couldn't see. While they mocked or pitted, I read, I created, I experimented with ideas that thrilled me. I discovered passions that required no permission or approval. I learned that my worth wasn't dictated by comparison or the hollow applause of those too blind to see me. Each small victory, completing a project, learning a new skill, helping someone in need, became a quiet rebellion against the labels they had assigned me. Even school was a battlefield. Teachers often complimented my insight, yet my parents would dismiss it. "She's smart, yes, but she doesn't apply herself," they would tell visiting relatives, laughing lightly, as if they were joking. I started to understand that people could be blind to truth if they chose to be. I started to understand that the most important validation had to come from me alone. I remember nights when I lay awake, listening to my brother's laughter echoing through the house, while mine seemed swallowed by the walls. I wanted to cry, to scream, to make someone see me, but I knew that if I drew attention, it would only be twisted into another example of my supposed inadequacy. So, I stayed quiet. I waited. I planned. Little did they know, every word they spoke, every sneer, every dismissive glance, was planting seeds. Seeds of patience. Seeds of skill. Seeds of a future where their voices would no longer have the power to define me. And though I smiled, nodded, and accepted the label of failure in public, inside, I was building a world where I alone would decide my worth, and when that day came, the silence I carried for so long would speak louder than any insult ever could. The engagement dinner was held in a grand hall of a restaurant that smelled of polished wood, expensive wine, and florals so carefully arranged they seemed almost unreal. The kind of place that demanded appearances, elegance, and careful smiles. I almost didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror before leaving. There was a quiet tension in my shoulders, a mix of anticipation and dread. I knew exactly what tonight would be, a showcase of my brother's successes and, by contrast, a reminder of all the ways I supposedly fell short. When I arrived, the room was buzzing with chatter. Laughter ricocheted off the walls, glasses clinked, and people leaned in to whisper congratulations. My parents floated from group to group, proud and radiant, basking in the glow of their son's achievements. My brother stood at the head of the table, effortlessly charming, a magnet for attention. Every compliment aimed at him felt like a small arrow to my chest. I was seated at the end of the long, polished table, near a wall. Not beside my parents, not beside my brother. Close enough to be included, far enough to be ignored. My seat was chosen, or rather, left for me, like an afterthought. And that, more than anything, stung. The night unfolded predictably. Stories were told, toasts were made, plans for the wedding discussed in meticulous detail. My brother basked in the attention, soaking up every word of praise. My parents glowed beside him, laughter ringing in the air as if the room itself had been designed to celebrate his existence and overlook mine. And then, as if on cue, someone inevitably asked about me. My mother's laugh was light, dismissive. "Oh, she's, well, you know. Still figuring things out," she said, smiling at the wrong people, ignoring me entirely. My father nodded, adding with a faint shrug, "She's a bit unconventional in her career path. Always has been." The words didn't sting like they used to. I had learned to absorb them like background noise, to let them slide off me while my mind quietly catalogued the truth I had built elsewhere. I smiled politely, nodded, and lifted my glass, a silent toast to myself. My silence was deliberate, a shield, a statement, a refusal to give them the satisfaction of reaction. That's when his fiancée turned her head toward me. She had been observing quietly all evening, her gaze curious, almost gentle. She leaned slightly forward and, in a voice just above a whisper, asked, "Wait, you're..." The world seemed to pause. Even the soft hum of conversation faltered. The words hung in the air like a suspended note, demanding attention. I met her eyes and smiled faintly, the corners of my mouth tight but calm. The recognition in her expression was unmistakable. She had discovered something true about me that my family had worked so hard to hide. All around the table, I could sense the shift. Heads turned, eyes widened. My parents' laughter faltered. My brother straightened, a flash of irritation crossing his face, as if someone had dared to challenge the story he had crafted about me. And I realized, in that instant, that my time of invisibility had ended. I sat back, composed, letting the room notice me for the first time in years. And for the first time, I understood that tonight wasn't just a dinner, it was the opening of a stage. One where the truth I had worked so hard to cultivate would finally speak, quietly but powerfully, in a way no words of theirs could ever undo. Her words had barely left her lips, "Wait, you're..." when the room seemed to pause. Glasses clinked somewhere in the distance, but the sound felt muted, almost irrelevant. Every head at the table turned toward me, some in confusion, some in dawning realization, and a few in something close to fear. The atmosphere had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt the invisible weight I carried ease slightly, replaced by a quiet, thrilling tension. The world was finally paying attention. The fiancée leaned in closer, her eyes wide and unblinking. You're the one? The woman whose work I've read about, whose voice I've heard in interviews? The expert everyone's been talking about in your field?" Her words stumbled, rushed and breathless, as if the truth could barely be contained. I nodded calmly, folding my hands on the table. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "That's me." The silence that followed was deafening. Even my parents, masters of deflection and casual dismissal, seemed struck dumb. My mother's hand froze mid-reach for a wine glass, her carefully curated smile faltering into something like shock. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. My brother, ever the confident one, shifted uneasily in his chair, trying to mask the sudden panic in his eyes. You never told us," my mother whispered, the words barely audible, yet sharp enough to slice the tension across the room. I met her gaze directly. "You never asked," I replied, simple and calm. No apology. No anger. Just truth. The fiancé's expression softened, a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I can't believe you didn't tell anyone." All this time, her voice trailed off. She looked around the table, finally landing on my brother. "And you," she said sharply, "you told me she was struggling, that she hadn't done anything. That she needed help?" My brother opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer, no excuse that could fit the room's new reality. Every lie he had spoken, every exaggeration, every casual dismissal of me now hung exposed like a fragile sculpture cracking under its own weight. I felt a curious calm settle over me, like stepping out of a storm into clear air. I didn't need to argue, explain, or justify. The truth was visible. My accomplishments, my hard work, my life, all the things they had ignored or minimized, were no longer invisible. The room had witnessed them. And it wasn't a confrontation I had forced. It was simply recognition, gently and powerfully occurring without me raising my voice. "You're incredible," the fiancée breathed, her eyes bright. "I've admired you for so long." She turned her gaze to my parents, who had no words. Their smiles had disappeared. For the first time, their carefully constructed image of control, of judgment, of me as the failure, was gone. And in that moment, I realized something essential: my family's opinion no longer mattered. I had spent years shrinking, hiding, accepting their labels, but now, I was fully visible. And the world around me had to reckon with who I truly was. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both calm and quiet power. The air was thick with the sound of my victory, soft, elegant, undeniable. And I knew, even before anyone spoke again, that my silence had always been my ally, and now, it had finally spoken. The moment I had waited for, the one I had imagined quietly, countless times in the small hours of the night, had arrived. The room was frozen, a still life of shocked expressions, as if the world had paused to acknowledge the truth I had always carried with me. My family had built their narrative for years. I was the quiet, unremarkable one. The failure. The child who would never measure up. Tonight, that story lay in pieces at their feet, and I was the calm witness to it all. I didn't need to speak loudly. I didn't need to point fingers or launch into a long list of accomplishments. The quiet power of truth filled the room, and I allowed it to linger, like a soft echo that wouldn't fade. I met the fiancée's eyes, and she smiled, a look of genuine awe and respect passing between us. She saw me, the real me, not the version my family had presented to the world. That acknowledgement alone felt like a victory. "You've made such an impact," she whispered, leaning slightly closer, though still careful to speak softly in front of the others. "I'm so sorry you've had to deal with them." I shook my head gently. "It's not about them anymore," I said. "It's never been about proving myself to anyone else. I've always known who I am." The weight in the room was palpable. My parents' faces had shifted from pride and smug satisfaction to confusion and discomfort. The proud, assured posture my brother had carried all evening was replaced by a tight, uneasy stillness. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that my life did not require their validation, and that their attempts to define me had no real power over the person I had become. I allowed myself a small smile, a soft but unmistakable declaration of strength. The irony was delicious: years of silence, of careful observation, of patiently building a life away from their judgment, had led to this moment. I had achieved my revenge not through anger or humiliation, but through dignity and undeniable truth. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to cry. I didn't even need to confront them directly. My existence, my accomplishments, and my calm composure were enough. "You don't need to say anything," I continued, my voice gentle but steady. "I came tonight because I was invited. Nothing more. Nothing less." The fiancée's eyes glistened. She turned to my parents, and I could see their unease. They had spent so many years defining me for others, manipulating narratives, and dismissing my worth. And yet, here I was, quietly untouchable, standing fully in my own truth. I left the dinner that night feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my life. I didn't linger to watch their reactions. I didn't wait for apologies or acknowledgement. I had claimed something far more valuable: my freedom from their judgment. My victory wasn't loud or vengeful, it was serene, inevitable, and beautiful. Walking out into the night, I realized something profound. All the years of being labeled, underestimated, and dismissed had prepared me not for revenge in the conventional sense, but for something far sweeter: self-respect. And in that quiet triumph, I understood that the most powerful revenge is not in tearing others down, it's in building yourself up so fully, so authentically, that their voices no longer matter. For the first time I was completely, undeniably free.